Thank you, Marianne, and thank you for having me do this. Thank you, Mom, for volunteering me. This was a real gift to be able to give this presentation because I got to learn about St. Josephine Bakhita. I knew a little bit about her before this, but I found out a lot more about her and why she's such an amazing saint and an intercessor for us. So hoping I can share a little bit of what I learned with you all. And of course, this is important because our parish has recently been renamed St. Josephine Bakhita, and I think a lot of us, including myself, when we received that name, we were like, who is this person? So hopefully we will find out tonight who is St. Josephine Bakhita. I'm actually going to start with a passage from the Bible before I get into her life. So this is from Romans chapter 8, and St. Paul is talking about the freedom that God offers to us. And I think this verse is just really relevant to St. Josephine's life, and she really lived out what St. Paul is talking about here. All who are led by the Spirit of God are sons of God. For you did not receive the spirit of slavery to fall back into fear, but you have received the spirit of sonship. When we cry, Abba, Father, it is the Spirit himself bearing witness with our spirit that we are children of God, and if children, then heirs, heirs of God, and fellow heirs with Christ, provided we suffer with him, in order that we may also be glorified with him. I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worth comparing with the glory that is to be revealed to us. For the creation waits with eager longing for the revealing of the sons of God. For the creation was subjected to fertility, not of its own will, but by the will of him who subjected it in hope. Because the creation itself will be set free from its bondage to decay and obtain the glorious liberty of the children of God. You can go to the next. So St. Josephine Bakhita was born in 1869. She was born in southern Sudan, which is the Darfur region today, in Africa, and it's circled on the map there. When she was about 7, she was kidnapped while she was working in a field, and she was sold into slavery. And of course, this was still common at that time. They asked her name when they took her, and she was so traumatized that she couldn't answer them. So we don't actually know what St. Josephine Bakhita's original name was. I thought that was really interesting. So her captors named her Bakhita, which means fortunate one, which is very ironic because at the time she wasn't fortunate. But of course her name became prophetic because in the end she was fortunate. God looked on her with fortune. So from the time that she was captured to her early 20s, St. Josephine was sold to a few different masters throughout the area of Sudan. Some of them treated her well, others did not. There was one in particular that beat her and scourged her excessively. And of course that was horrible, but in this we can also see that she was in a way already being conformed to Christ and already sharing in his sufferings even before she knew him. And this is a quote from Pope Benedict during when he talked about her. He said that her master had himself accepted the destiny of being flogged, and now he was waiting for her at the Father's right hand. So he was just pointing out that St. Josephine shared in Christ's sufferings by being flogged as he was scourged. So the interesting thing is that since she lived in Sudan, she was only surrounded by Muslim people. Masters were Muslim, so she was essentially raised as a Muslim. So she didn't know about Christianity, except then she eventually was bought by an Italian diplomat, and he took her to Italy. And it was then that was the turning point of her life. So this Italian family treated her well. She was more like a maid and a governess to their child. And she really became part of their family. The mother of this family wanted to give St. Josephine Christian instruction. She wanted to instruct her in the Christian faith. So she sent St. Josephine and their daughter to these sisters to receive catechetical instruction, basically. And the parents had to go travel somewhere else for some diplomat, they had to go do their work. So they left their daughter and St. Josephine with these sisters, and they were taught the Catholic faith. And so St. Josephine wanted to get baptized after that, after she got to know Christ. Then the parents came back and they wanted her to come with them and leave there, and she refused to leave because she had found God there. She said, "I shall not leave this place because I cannot risk losing God." And not only had she found God there, but she also wanted to become a sister, so she didn't want to leave the sisters. And luckily, her owners were open to this. So they looked into legally freeing her of her slavery, and it turned out that slavery had been already proclaimed illegal in Italy when they brought her in. So the judge said she should have never been enslaved anyway. So she was emancipated, she was freed, and she stayed with the sisters. She was able to become a sister. And I think one of the really amazing things about that is that she was given her freedom from slavery at the same time as she was baptized and received into the church. So she was freed on both levels, like the physical and the spiritual level. I just think that's really cool. So one of the things that is also amazing about St. Josephine is once she came to know Christ, she realized that he was what she had been looking for all along. So we hear this a lot in stories of people who converted. They knew that they were seeking some greater being. Maybe they looked at the world around them and said, there must be some divine being that made all this, but I don't know who it is. And then when they come to know God and Christ and Christianity, they realize that that's the truth. And that's what happened to St. Josephine. She, after she converted, she reflected on how she used to feel like that. She said, "Seeing the sun, the moon, and the stars, I said to myself, who could be the master of these beautiful things? And I felt a great desire to see him, to know him, and to pay homage to him." So she had this desire in her heart, and when she met Christ, she realized that he was what she had been looking for. So I think the biggest things we can learn from St. Josephine are really just how to suffer well, but also about forgiveness. So this is a quote that St. Josephine said later in her life about the people that kidnapped her and enslaved her and did terrible things to her. "If I were to meet the slave traders who kidnapped me and even those who tortured me, I would kneel and kiss their hands, for if that did not happen, I would not be a Christian and a religious today." That's a really bold statement. She's saying that she would be thankful to them because everything that she went through led her to Christ. I think this just shows how free she was, not only physically, but spiritually. That she didn't harbor any hatred or bitterness or unforgiveness against the people who hurt her. Because if she remained angry at them and wouldn't forgive them, she would still be enslaved by that. They would have control over her. So she was truly free. So when I was preparing for this, I realized that St. Josephine's story reminds me a lot of Joseph from the Old Testament, and of course they share a similar name, so I don't think there's a coincidence there. So Joseph was also sold into slavery by his family. He was sold into slavery and was brought to Egypt, and he ended up winning the favor of the Pharaoh, and he saved Egypt and the whole surrounding area from a terrible famine at the time. And this is when he was reunited with his family, and his brothers were, of course, very sorry for what they had done to him. He said this to them: "Now do not be grieved or angry with yourselves because you sold me here. For God sent me before you to preserve life. God sent me before you to preserve for you a remnant in the earth and to keep you alive by a great deliverance. Now, therefore, it was not you who sent me here, but God." And I can imagine St. Josephine saying that to her captors. She had that spirit of realizing that it was God's hand all along, that he brought her where he wanted to. And he worked through those terrible circumstances to bring good. One of the most important things that we can learn, and that St. Josephine learned, was simply that she was loved by God. That was the biggest thing that was missing from her life before she met Christ. She didn't know that there was this God that loved her. This is a couple of quotes from her. "I am definitively loved, and whatever happens to me, I am awaited by this love, and my life is so good." Just knowing that love, she knew that God would take care of her no matter what. And she also said, "If I had known it, God's love, when I was a slave, I would never have suffered so much." So if she had had that consolation, she knew that her slavery would have been easier if she had known God. And that she would have known that he would bring good out of it no matter what. But she didn't have that hope. So after St. Josephine joined the sisters, her superiors asked her to travel around Italy and give talks and raise money for the missions in Africa. And this was actually a big sacrifice for her because she wanted to go back to Africa and evangelize her people and help them. But this is what she was ordered to do, and that's the way that God thought he could use her the best. And really, Christ was her new master, and she served him out of love. And she served him until she died on February 8th, 1947. I mean, she really didn't live that long ago. And now we celebrate her feast day on February 8th. So I just wanted to leave you with a few key points of what we can learn from St. Josephine Bakhita and some things to reflect on. We can learn how to suffer well, that when we rely on God and hold on to him in suffering, he can be our consolation. We can learn how to see that God works through all things and works all things for the good of those who love him. We learn how to love our enemies and to forgive them. And most importantly, we learn from her how to be free. And I love that phrase from Romans that I shared at the beginning, the glorious freedom of the children of God. And that freedom ultimately comes from knowing that we are loved, which St. Josephine did. I just want to end with a prayer to St. Josephine. Loving God, who rewards the humble with your own transcendent grace, you blessed St. Josephine Bakhita with remarkable charity, mercy, even for those whose hatred, greed, and lust for power rendered them blind to her luminous humanity. May her prayers on behalf of the exploited, the victimized, and the powerless rescue the captives, strengthen the oppressed, and move the hearts and minds of the unjust. May your light flood into the darkest shadows amid our needful world, carrying with it the balm of your healing and unfathomable mercies, both for those innocents who suffer and survive within such sinful darkness, for the wayward souls who have brought them there. In you we beg, these broken hearts and wounded spirits, have mercy upon a world disordered and disoriented by the non-stop assault of evil. Through your Son, Jesus Christ, whose own consecrated servant, Josephine Bakhita, bore the scars of exploitation, and now resides forever before your throne, as patroness of these poor souls. Amen. St. Josephine Bakhita, pray for us. Thank you.